I said I don't want your pity. The man's voice roared through the sterile hospital room, harsh and raw. He slapped the plastic water cup off the tray, sending it crashing to the floor. A startled silence fell as a few nurses outside the door paused, exchanging wary glances. Inside, Nurse Claire inhaled sharply, her knuckles whitening as she gripped the edge of her notepad. She fought to keep her composure. For 2 weeks, she'd endured his insults, his shouting, his refusal to cooperate. But today, he seemed worse, like a storm ready to explode. She looked at him, a middle-aged man with graying stubble, gaunt cheeks, and eyes full of bitterness. The name on the chart read Thomas Grant. A mystery of a man, admitted after a car accident, refusing visitors, family, or even small talk. His towering rage seemed to serve as both a wall and a weapon. Claire crouched, picking up the fallen cup. I'm not here to pity you, Mr. Grant. I'm here to help you heal. Whether you like me or not doesn't change that. Her voice was firm but soft. Years of experience had taught her that anger often masked pain. You think you know me? He sneered, voice shaking. You don't know a damn thing about my life. None of you do. Claire paused and met his eyes. Maybe not, but I know that pain makes people push others away. And I know it doesn't have to be this way. A flicker of something, surprise, crossed his face, but it disappeared just as quickly. He turned his head toward the window, dismissing her. Get out. Claire sighed and stood. I'll be back later to check on you, whether you like it or not. That night, Claire sat alone in the break room, rubbing at the ache in her temples. Thomas Grant was becoming a problem. The nurses whispered about his attitude, some refusing to take his room assignments. But Claire refused to give up on him. She couldn't explain why. There was just something about him. Years earlier, Claire had nearly quit nursing after losing her mother. A nurse at the same hospital, her mother had worked tirelessly, but often been mistreated, seen as just a nurse by doctors and patients alike. But her mother's quiet kindness had inspired Claire to continue. Everyone deserves kindness, Claire, especially those who act like they don't need it, she used to say. She thought about Thomas's outburst. What kind of pain made someone lash out so fiercely? The next day, Claire found Thomas awake early, staring at the ceiling. He looked defeated. Dark circles shadowed his eyes, and the sneer was gone. For the first time, she saw a man who wasn't angry, just broken. Morning, Mr. Grant, Claire said quietly, placing a tray of food beside his bed. He didn't respond. Claire hesitated, then pulled a chair close. You know, I had this patient once, she began. An elderly woman who would scream and throw things. Everyone avoided her. But one day, I sat down and listened. She told me her story, how loneliness had hollowed her out. She didn't need medicine. She needed someone to see her. Thomas's fingers twitched against the blanket. And what happened to her? She started to smile again. Claire shrugged. Sometimes, being seen is the medicine we don't know we need. Thomas turned his head slightly, looking at Claire with an intensity that made her pause. His voice was hoarse when he spoke. You remind me of someone. Claire tilted her head. Who? He closed his eyes, exhaling shakily. Someone I lost a long time ago. Someone I failed. The words hung heavy in the air. Claire didn't press for more, but something shifted in the room, like a crack appearing in the armor he'd spent years building. 3 days later, Thomas was discharged. He was quieter now, less confrontational. When Claire entered the room with his discharge papers, he looked at her with something close to gratitude. You're different from the others, he murmured. I'm just doing my job, Claire replied softly. No. Thomas shook his head. You did more than that. He scribbled something onto a piece of paper and handed it to her. Claire glanced at it. An address. What's this? She asked, confused. You'll understand soon, he said cryptically, then turned and walked out of the hospital, A week later, Claire stood nervously in front of a grand ivy-covered building. It was a private hospital, far beyond anything she could afford or imagine working at. She held Thomas's note tightly in her hand, repeating his words. Go to this address. Ask for Dr. Willis. Inside, a receptionist greeted her warmly and led her through the pristine halls to an office. A kind-looking man rose to greet her. You must be Claire, he said. We've been expecting you. Expecting me? She echoed, stunned. Dr. Willis smiled. Thomas Grant asked me to consider you for a position here. He spoke very highly of you. Claire blinked. Why would he? Dr. Willis's expression softened. Thomas Grant is the founder of this hospital. Years ago, he lost his wife to an illness and blamed himself for not getting her better care. It haunted him. He spent his life building this place in her honor, but he never forgave himself. Until you. Claire's heart pounded as the pieces clicked into place. Thomas Grant wasn't just a bitter man. He was a grieving soul who'd found a sliver of redemption in her care. As Claire left the hospital that day with a new job offer in hand, she couldn't help but smile. Her mother's words echoed in her mind. Everyone deserves kindness, Claire. Thomas had changed her future, but it was her kindness that had changed his first.